Welcome back to Collectability, and this is our second NFS video, meaning this is not for sale, but Collectability is pleased to present an extraordinary piece, a piece with history, intrigue, and a design that you may have never seen before. I think we have to go back to the 19th century and meet my dear friend, Mr. Albert Farman. Albert Farman was an Egyptologist. He was the consul general to Egypt. He was an explorer. He was a treasure hunter. And he is the type of person that I dare say may have inspired Indiana Jones. He was the Indiana Jones of the late 19th and early 20th century. He went to Amherst College for undergrad and then eventually found his way to Europe and studied Egyptian history and languages at the University of Berlin in Germany. It was during this time that his knowledge and passion in Egyptology grew. He soon found himself in Cairo, and in 1878, Farman was assigned to go on a trip with Ulysses S. Grant, who recently completed his presidency and wanted to go on a world tour, which lasted 2.5 years with his wife. When they arrived in Egypt, they spent time with Farman on an adventure that lasted months on the Nile. During this adventure, they went to see some of the amazing bits of antiquity, and Farman even introduced former President Grant to the Khedive, the leader of Egypt at the time. And that Khedive becomes very important to the story of this watch and Cleopatra's Needle, which we'll discuss momentarily. So after this presidential trip, he continued to build his connections, and he wrote a book called Egypt and Its Betrayal. Within this book, Farman shared his opinion in great detail of how the English and the French really mishandled their time in Egypt, and showed how the Americans could help pave the path for a better Egypt in the future. This is the time of imperialism, and Farman was very much at the core of it. And one of the things that was happening at this time was that other countries were essentially stealing antiquities from Egypt and using them as trophies of conquest within their capital cities. And the obelisk was one of the most celebratory objects that one could take from Egypt to put into your capital. In London, there was an obelisk that was taken in the early 19th century, which you could still see today, right on the embankment in London. In Paris, right in the center of the city, you can see another one of these incredible pieces of antiquity, which was also taken in the 19th century. And the Americans were jealous. They saw that there was one in Paris, there was one in London, so there had to be one in New York. And that's where Farman comes in. So within these pages, he describes in great detail in a chapter called The Gift of the Obelisk, how this obelisk made its journey to the United States. And you'll see this incredible engraving here, a picture of how this obelisk was transported across the Atlantic, literally sticking out of the hull of the boat. Once it arrived in New York, it took 5 months to move it from the Hudson River across Manhattan to get it to its final resting place, which is in Central Park in New York City. Interestingly, this obelisk is now known as Cleopatra's Needle, but it really has nothing to do with Cleopatra. The pharaoh Thutmose commissioned this amazing obelisk to be built in approximately 1425 BC. And it was all over 1400 years later that the Romans moved this obelisk from Heliopolis, which where it was originally, to Alexandria. And this is where the Americans literally put their flag at the tip of the obelisk and started the long voyage across the sea, bringing it to New York. During its time in Alexandria, this is how it was and why it was nicknamed Cleopatra's Needle, because it was placed outside of an amazing stadium made specifically in the honor of Julius Caesar. So Cleopatra's Needle is a nickname, but it's a misnomer. The twin of this obelisk is the obelisk that's in London. They are exactly alike. They were both mined at the same time and both taken from Egypt and brought to these emerging powers. So as we close the chapter from Egypt and we move on to New York, we see the obelisk in its new position, which it is to this day, right next to the Met in Central Park. And if you visit it, you'll see Farman's name because he was key in moving this obelisk to this place. But you'll also see a number of other engravings and messages, some secret and some not so secret. And this is where the Masonic element of the story comes in. Because indeed, Farman was a Mason. The person who was responsible for moving this obelisk to the United States was no other than William Vanderbilt, one of the richest men in the world at the time, also a Mason. And when this obelisk arrived in New York, there was a parade of 9,000 Masons celebrating this victory of taking this object from Egypt and bringing it to New York. 50,000 New Yorkers watched and cheered on as the obelisk went through the streets, and they celebrated this amazing event. And we can imagine this watch was in Farman's pocket at that time, because this watch was Farman's timepiece dating back to 1875. He was the original owner of this piece, and the design is quite fascinating because we're going to see a hat at the top, which conceals the dial. We're going to see a pickaxe. We're going to see within the satchel, the shape of the satchel, secret compartments on each side. And of course, there is a secret compartment. When you open the back, you see the words Patek Philippe, and of course, the movement and the case number. When I first saw this watch, now it was about 4 years ago, we ordered an archive. And the extract from the archive confirmed everything that we wanted to see, which was, it was made in 1875. It was originally sold in 1876, which was a very important centennial year for the Americans. And under remarks, it describes the watch was made in the shape of a backpack. So this confirmed this unbelievably unique watch was indeed meant to look like a backpack. And Farman custom ordered this piece to celebrate his life in Egypt, the way he traveled. And I would dare say this is a model of the rucksack that he carried as he was crawling around the pyramids and exploring for obelisks. And when Farman received this watch in 1876, you can imagine him picking it up in his hands, probably shaking in awe of this piece that he waited over a year to get, and pushing this little button in the bottom, and boom, the hat pops up and you can see the time. This Patek Philippe dial with Roman numerals was made in white enamel. And I could only imagine once again that he carried this watch with him for many years and shared it with other people in the midst of Egypt mania of the time. When Farman designed this watch, presumably closely with the assistance of Patek Philippe, he asked for specific things that meant a lot to him, symbols of his adventures in Egypt, symbols of his tools that he used in exploring Egypt at the time. This was a piece meant for conversation. It was something that he would have taken out when having dinner with friends or visiting former presidents or future presidents to explain what Egypt meant to him, what the history of Egypt meant to civilization, and what this little watch meant to him in his adventures and traveling around the world. It was a very personal watch for him. And I propose that the symbols hidden within this timepiece are still unknown. We haven't cracked the code of what each of these symbols mean. There could be simple things right before our very eyes, like the movement number is 50607. 7 being a magical number in the world of Masonic tradition. Could he have requested that number? We don't know. We could only explore the possibilities. Everything about this watch, from the way that it's made in gold and has these platinum details set within it, means something. During the 19th century, the symbolism within watches cannot be underestimated. The number of straps that we see on the watch, the number of sides on this platinum crown shaped, I believe, as a dish of some sort, as some sort of bucket, maybe to carry water for his exploration. The way that the side pockets are cut and hand engraved. Even the mysterious swirl that you'll see on the side, at the top of the rucksack, it looks like a blanket that was folded away for an adventure. It's a story of the relationship between a collector and his prized possession, his backpack, Patek Philippe. And when this watch appeared for the first time, discovered by my former colleague, Ryan Chong, in 2019, he researched this watch, and together we tried to learn as much as we could about this timepiece. And I still think there's more to be learned. The gentleman who had the foresight to buy this watch at Christie's during that auction a couple of years ago had the foresight to buy something of incredible history. And I think the magnitude of the importance of this watch is still underestimated. As we learn more and decode the mysteries of this timepiece, unlike any other Patek Philippe that we've seen from the 19th and 20th century, I think we'll understand this is one of the most important Patek Philippe's that's ever been made. It's a watch shrouded in history, adventure, and intrigue. And it's a watch that I think belongs in the Patek Philippe Museum. But until then, the lucky collector who owns this piece is cherishing it as his prized possession. And it is not for sale. Thank you for joining us today on this horological adventure. If you enjoyed this trip, please like and subscribe on YouTube and Instagram, and we look forward to seeing you again shortly. In the meantime, enjoy the hunt.